Hey summoners, and welcome back to another Wild Rift video. My name is Nathan Ng, and today we'll be going over the 7 most underrated picks on Wild Rift. The current cast of champions on the Wild Rift isn't huge, but there's still some picks that are far stronger than most people would expect and should be getting more play. First up, we have OLAF in the Baron lane. OLAF is primarily thought of as a jungler with strong clear speed, heavy sustain, powerful melee dueling, and incredibly fast objective taking. These strengths make him relatively powerful as a jungler, however his ganks can sometimes be lackluster if players dodge his axe. OLAF in the Baron lane, however, gets to make use of his 2 core strengths to their absolute fullest. OLAF has incredible dueling against melee champions with insane attack speed when he's low, high levels of sustain, and huge damage output with his axe and reckless swing. OLAF's harass is also nothing to shrug off, with his axe doing relevant damage throughout the entire laning phase. While ranged Baron laners like Vayne deal relatively well against OLAF, in the early game if they get tagged with a single axe, they may often just be chased down by the following axes. OLAF possesses incredible power in the early game and can leverage this to single-handedly dominate the entire top side of the map. OLAF's primary issue as a jungler is that his gold income begins to slow down going into the mid game, leading him to scale poorly and becoming quite easy for mages and marksmen to tear down in seconds. In the Baron lane, OLAF maintains split push power against many champions for most of the game and has increased access to gold and XP, which slows down how fast the enemy team outscales him and makes him relevant for essentially the entire game. On the Wild Rift, the team with the most early game strength usually wins, and OLAF gives you that in spades. Next, we have GRAGAS jungle. GRAGAS has maintained basically the same level of power throughout the entirety of Wild Rift, however, he's virtually ignored by most of the community. GRAGAS isn't really an OP pick or soon to be dominating the Rift, but he can absolutely ruin certain compositions, and a well-placed explosive cask can win teamfights on its own. In the early game, GRAGAS isn't particularly fearsome on his own. He doesn't have the burst to one-shot and doesn't possess the sustained damage to have an incredibly fast clear or much dueling potential. Where he does shine, however, is in his ganks. His body slam is a great crowd control and can be used to force out a flash, and if it hits, the rest of Gragas' combo does plenty of damage and will often be enough to secure a kill when combined with their laner's burst. GRAGAS shines once he unlocks his ultimate, Explosive Cask. Gragas' ganking ability goes through the roof once he reaches level 5. Leading with Body Slam becomes far more threatening if the enemy knows an Explosive Cask is coming afterwards to fly them into your team. And if they choose to flash your Body Slam, you still have the opportunity to catch them out with their ultimate. Gragas' teamfighting is also insane, with Explosive Cask having the potential to split up entire teams. A well-placed Gragas Cask can send the enemy backline straight into the middle of your team to be one-shot or knock them away while you destroy their frontline. The damage Gragas deals with this cask cannot be underestimated, and carries will not be happy about being ulted away and losing a sizable chunk of their HP. Before we continue, make sure you join our Wild Rift Discord in the description down below, and subscribe to keep up with all the updates relating to Wild Rift. KENNEN, one of the new Yordles to debut in the Wild Rift, has been tearing up a storm in the Baron lane. His electrifying gameplay is quite shocking. He's annoying in the early game, great at setting up ganks, hard to gank himself, and an excellent teamfighter. KENNEN in the mid lane, for the most part, is pretty underrated. He's not as powerful in the mid lane since he excels at bullying out melee champions, but as a mid laner, his kit functions pretty well. Hextech Gunblade is a core item on KENNEN, and while you can't auto-attack as much in the mid lane, having access to such a powerful source of sustain is something that most mid laners also cannot do. This allows KENNEN to take losing trades, but still come out on top after he heals up. The active damage is also great for killing squishy targets, and can turn him into an extremely threatening assassin once he completes it. KENNEN doesn't possess long range on his auto attacks, but his Thundering Shuriken can be used to last hit minions that would otherwise be too dangerous to grab. And if he lands it on the enemy laner, he can follow up with Electrical Surge for some nice poke. KENNEN is also manaless, meaning he doesn't have to rely on blue buff or does he have to slow down his build to obtain mana. He can go straight into damage items and continue to burst out entire teams. KENNEN's best strengths are his roaming and teamfighting. Once you actually get out of the mid lane and can help assist other lanes, your insane burst and lockdown make it easy for your side laners to lap up the kills and get fed. Once the mid game comes around and people are grouping up more, your potential only increases. The closer people are to each other, the better you are. And once the teamfight breaks out, you can flash in, cast Slicing Maelstrom, and even if you aren't doing so hot in lane, the enemy team will be locked in place and quickly melt away. Before we get into our next underrated pick, our question of the day is, what champion do you love having on your team? Make sure to leave your answers in the comments down below. When Wild Rift was released, ZHAO was one of the champions that everybody initially thought was going to be extremely OP. and he somewhat was, but a lot of the rest of the cast hadn't really been explored that much, and the simplicity and ease of Xin Zhao made him straightforward to win games on. Now, champions like Shyvana and Lee Sin ruled the jungle, but Xin Zhao also takes his place as an early game powerhouse and ganking machine. Xin Zhao is still pretty good at early dueling, but other stronger junglers tend to muscle him out. Where he truly excels is pairing him up with other champions and bursting down champions as a duo. Xin Zhao's burst combo is front-loaded and his sustained damage is fairly low, so you want to be killing people as quickly as you can. Between him and the laner, often you can send targets to the grave in a matter of seconds. Xin Zhao also has access to point-and-click CC, which opponents can't really outplay. Xin Zhao's early game ganks are excellent, and 2 successful ganks can often sway the entire game. Xin Zhao's kit is also extremely simple and easy to use. Some champions like Vayne, Fizz, and Yasuo all carry an extreme burden of execution, and if you aren't having your best day, sometimes they can be challenging to win on at all. This is where Xin Zhao shines. When you lock him in, you don't really have to think much about where you press your abilities. You're kind of like a shitty frat boy. You go in, knock him up, and just send them home. Graves hasn't really found his home yet on Wild Rift, and players are still trying him out in the Baron lane, in the mid lane, and in the jungle to not much success. However, Graves is a pretty strong jungler, and while most of the player base is obsessed with Shyvana and Lee Sin, we think that you should still try out Graves. Graves has a solid early clear and can be an especially powerful duelist against melee champions like Shyvana and Amumu, who either don't have gap closers or can be easily dodged. Graves can invade them on their camps, auto-attacking them from range with the red buff, applying extra slows and damage while they get bursted down by end of the line. Even if they manage to get in range of Graves, they'll be taking full damage from his shotgun shells, and they've likely already been chunked down and the fight is easy to win from there. His ganks aren't the worst, with solid burst and sustained damage, the slow and vision denial from smokescreen, and the red buff slows from his auto attacks, making him a relatively powerful ganker. Where Graves truly excels is in the mid game, once he has a few items. Graves slowly transitions into either a drain tank high DPS machine or a crazy lethality assassin depending on your build. Both have their places in different games, but in most games the drain tank build featuring lifesteal and resistances will often prove best. When Graves gets ahead, he can absorb insane amounts of damage, living by the skin of his teeth. He can use quick draw to dash into enemy teams, pass their skill shots, and deliver his burst onto enemy carries. From ahead, Graves can become extremely obnoxious, and in skilled hands has an incredible amount of carry potential even versus the best of players. 1 or 2 early kills can set up a nasty snowball, and you'll often find Graves carrying games that many other champions cannot. Yasuo has quickly climbed the tiers and has become one of the better mid laners on the patch. He's nimble and pumps out a hefty amount of critical strikes as soon as he gets going, and he has bucket loads of outplay potential. He's actually most suited to dealing with mages and marksmen as he can delete most of their potential damage output, but he also finds a home in the Baron lane, where he is only slightly weaker than mid, but definitely a very potent pick. Yasuo doesn't deal well with auto attack focused bruisers like Camille, Fiora, and Wukong, and tends to get destroyed with minimal counterplay. Where Yasuo shines is against champions he can kite. He can do this relatively well with his long-range Steel Tempest or outplay with dashes between minions and his Wind Wall. With the more introduction of Yordles into the Wild Rift, range Baron laners are becoming more and more common. Yasuo deals with these champions exceptionally well, absorbing their harass with his shield, gap closing through minions onto them, and deleting their major skills with the Wind Wall. The Baron lane is also relatively long compared to the mid lane, and when he's played against champions like Kennen and Teemo, they often have to fare for their lives as there's a relatively long lane for Yasuo to chase them down in. Yasuo also pairs extremely well with some of the strong mid laners like Seraphine and Orianna. Yasuo loves any champion with supportive abilities and crowd control, and both of those champions love to have Yasuo on their team. Seraphine can start crowd control chains that Yasuo can follow up on, and Orianna's Shockwave is one of the best setups for last breath in the game, up there with Alistar combo and Unstoppable Force. Overall, Yasuo's Baron laning potential is relatively high, and while in some matchups he gets completely dominated, he's still an underrated pick in certain compositions. Last up, we have Wukong in the jungle. The Monkey King has always been flexed towards the jungle, but for the most part of his existence, he's primarily been slotted into the Baron lane. He's a powerful duelist with a decent clear speed, but most of all, he's just an excellent champion to have on your team if you need that crowd control. Cyclone is one of the most powerful crowd control abilities in the game, and having access to the 2 casts makes Wukong an excellent team fighter. He's great from ahead and can take over games on his own if he's accelerated, but he still maintains his utility from behind. Wukong jungle really powers up once he reaches level 5. His ganks beforehand aren't the worst, but with no crowd control, it's never going to be that powerful. When he has access to Cyclone, however, every laner must be afraid. He can use Warrior Trickster to stealth from a bush, or from the Fog of War, lead with Nimbus Strike, and then he has 2 casts of Cyclone for 2 powerful knockups, backed with heaps of damage. Wukong's no slouch in the early game and can often be great in extended fights, but the OP meta junglers at the moment tend to outpower him in these situations. When you're paired up with a laner or the enemy is a little bit lower than you, however, you're still strong and can definitely take early game fights. He's a flexible jungler and can be played to support your winning lanes or take the games into your own hands, and he is pretty underrated. Anyway, that's gonna be it for our 7 most underrated picks on Wild Rift. Most of these aren't what we consider OP picks, except for OLAF in the Baron lane, but they're all extremely good and can often trick players up when picking their own champion. If you haven't already, make sure you give these picks a go and let us know in the comments how it went. As always, thank you so much for watching, and make sure you answer a question of the day in the comments down below. With all that being said, stay safe, stay healthy, and have a wonderful day. Peace.